Noah's Ark moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have an opportunity to pivot, to shift, to recognize, a lot of people say, are there conflicts between my belief in climate change and my belief in God? And I say, no. I think that God has called us to live a certain way, to live with each other. And that's not always easy. I mean, I love my family, but there are times when it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But when we don't live that way, when we hoard and when we build an economy where some people benefit and other people can go to work 40 hours a week and still be homeless,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't look like loving our neighbor.
Right.
So I think it was powerful. A number of our panelists talked about the importance of praying and fasting, and I believe in that too. But I believe that we pray and we fast hard. It's one of the things I actually, have my own practice around prayer and silence and fasting, because then I believe that God calls me to stand up
Mm-hmm.
and fight so that the kingdom of God is actually built on this earth.
Yes.
That it really looks like people moving through our communities, loving their neighbors both in the way we talk to each other,
Mm-hmm.
the way we interact with each other, but also making sure that the policies we have
Mm-hmm.
align. They look like love.
Mm-hmm.
Love doesn't look like abuse.
Yes. Yes.
Love doesn't look like I don't want to see you, or I would wish for you what I wouldn't wish for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we have an important opportunity to not just be clear about what we say as Christians, but what we do, how we look like love,
Mm-hmm.
and how we call for everyone in our country to have policies that look like love.
So faith without works is dead.
It is.
And one of the things that you seem to allude to and resonated with me was that we ourselves have to show justice, and we have to act justly if we're going to be about the business of justice.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to do it outside of the house, we have to do it inside of the house.
Yep.
And so this is just such a pleasure. So many things that you said, so many things that came out of it. What would be your main point to give to the faith community that's out there? Because our focus is a healthy faith community that is fulfilling our role in the world around us, and not just talking about it, but like you said, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. What would be your final words to those who are listening?
Well, I think two things. So first of all, one of the things I think I found most disappointing about the president-elect is his very distant relationship with the truth. But I have to be honest that sometimes we as people of faith aren't keeping it real ourselves. People say, oh, I'm just blessed. You come to church and you sort of say certain kinds of things, but we're not talking about the hard challenges. For instance, it took us a long time to awaken to the AIDS crisis because we just couldn't be honest. So I want to see our houses of worship and our communities of faith get a lot more real about what's going on in the world first. The second is, I think we need to recognize that there is more than one way to be a Christian. And as long as you can solidly sort of say, this is why I feel called to see this. And again, I shouldn't say feel, because I think you really, I do believe in you really seeking the words, really fasting and praying to hear from God. But I think we've had a tradition where we think there's only one way to think. And if you don't think that way, then you're not saved. You're not a Christian. And that actually limits us from having healthy debate and conversation. I don't think it's that easy to know what it is.
I agree.
That God wants. I think his thoughts and God's thoughts are beyond my way of thinking. And so I'm only going to find that when I really spend the time, not just to search the word, but to have those kind of conversations, the tough conversations, the dialogues, the ones that make me go home and go, I need to rethink how I've been doing this. And I don't think we've encouraged those kinds of spaces in our church. And I think we need to do that. In the same way we need healthy dialogue and dissent at the national level, I think we also need some healthy dialogue and space for dissent in our congregations, because I think when we have those tough dialogues, it's going to make us better and stronger and allow us to respect each other's diversity while still living with love.
Very awesome. That is just right on point, and it is right where we need to be. So faith community, as you are listening, and even if you're not part of the faith community, realize that we're talking about issues that touch everyone, and that we are concerned and don't want to plateau at a place where we can't discuss and tolerate each other's differences. So we thank you so much for your time and for your gifts and talents. May the Lord just bless and keep you and prosper you in all that you do. Thank you so much, Reverend Hammond.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless you, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. RSO Today, downloaded from www.rso.today. Thank you, and you have a wonderful evening. This is Dr. Saunders, Dr. Donna at the RSO Today, and we have Mr. Emerson Miller, who is a mental health worker, had some very powerful words to share. We wanted you to share what it is that you talked about as we were dealing with the role of the faith community as we're moving into our new administration. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I was wondering about the people who don't have a voice right now, the people whose voice has been silenced by oppression and poverty and the like. And how do we reach that population and continue the work that we're doing? And how do we unite everybody involved in that cause? I mean, we often talk, we preach to the choir a lot, and it's nice and it feels good, but it's not always the best use of our time.
What have been some of your observations being in the mental health field in terms of who those individuals are that have no voice or are oftentimes being the ones overlooked? Talk to us a little bit about that, because our public needs to hear that.
So race is not necessarily an indicator. Born in poverty, oftentimes drug addicted, history of substance abuse, history of just not having a chance at all. A lot of the cycle of poverty and then DCF involvement, children born at a young age, and the cycle continues. And the biggest thing that I've noticed is that by the time adults come to see me, there's been no intervention. And I think if we are able to intervene earlier in life, however that looks, it may be a different outcome.
A last question to that, and that's very profound, and I found that same thing in my practice. Oftentimes people who are not certified, licensed, whatever, believe that they don't have what it takes to be able to reach and intervene because the problems are so involved that many of these individuals are dealing with that, that it requires a professional. So what do you say to the average everyday churchgoer person that's concerned? Is there a place and a role that these individuals can play, even if they don't have a license, in terms of dealing with those who have no voice?
Absolutely. I went to school for a lot of years, learning a lot, but none of it's really what really I use is empathy, and I treat everybody with respect. I call it unconditional positive regard.
Yes.
And I think that people have that. They either have it or they don't. People sometimes with a history of all of the stuff that I'm talking about are the best advocates.
Absolutely.
And I don't think there's licensing. I don't think there's a level of education that needs to happen. In fact, I think it's the opposite, actually.
The basic love your neighbor as yourself?
I think that's way more effective than somebody like me coming into a situation that I don't understand or that I may never understand.
And perhaps we can prevent a whole lot of things if we all begin to recapture the loving your neighbor as yourself. And you mentioned the word empathy, which is the ability to walk in someone else's shoes, to be able to consider. So even, and you said that race does not necessarily but that it's more than that. So we have that. And Emerson Miller, we just thank you so much. What's some last words you would like to give to our public?
I am very grateful for this, and I would really like to hope that this is not just one conversation. Oftentimes we have great events like this, and then the idea fades away, and then we live our lives. But this is a conversation that has to continue if we're going to affect change.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to this not being the only time.
Thank you very much.
God bless you.
Okay.
Let me give you that. Okay, and there we have it. We'll be right back. We have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And God bless you.
God bless you.
Put this way. Okay, you ready? Okay.
Marcel, we still running?
Welcome back to RSO Today. I'm Dr. Saunders and Dr. Donna Saunders, and we are here at the forum to deal with morals and justice as it relates to the faith community as we're moving into our new administration. And we have Pastor Scott, who was one of our panelists, had very profound words to share. I'd like you to summarize your main message as we were in this panel talking about the new administration and what role it is that the faith community plays. And then we'll get into a little bit of what it is that you do and what your focus is.
Well, I think my biggest focus was, God is still in his watchtower.
Mm-hmm.
God is still watching, and he's calling on us to watch,
Yes.
to be alert, to be engaged, and to know that we are powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We come from a powerful position. We're a powerful people. We serve a powerful God. We're victorious. We're not defeated. And we need to engage, struggle, resist, and really press forward.
Mm-hmm.
With hope, with courage, with strength, together,
Mm-hmm.
unified, building connections with one another,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the issues and more deeply, and fighting.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that was fielded to you had to
Ronald's office is here. Actually, Seymour Wilkerson is also here. We thank God for them. And then I also saw a number of pastors in the house. We got to recognize all of you. See, Pastor Dickerson was here. Pastor Green was here. God bless you, men and women of God that are here. Pastor Virginia Ward's here as well. If you're a pastor, would you stand? If you're here, would you stand? Pastor, minister, would you stand? Bless you. So we continue to serve in the church as we always have. One of the things that a Trump presidency is not going to change is the sun shining. The air that we're breathing is still there. We know that because we're alive. We heard birds chirping, or some of us did. My point is that life goes on, and we serve a higher purpose. We need to be focused on the big picture. And I said it in my 45-minute stint, my 45-second stint, but I'm going to say it again, is that God sits on the throne. We can't allow the enemy of our souls to put lies in our hearts and in our minds that the world is going to be over, and that the Trump presidency is going to just be disastrous for African American peoples and peoples of color. We got to fight through that, and we can't allow the naysayers, we can't allow the negativites to keep us from doing what we know we need to do in the church. I'm still going to serve. I'm still going to feed the hungry. I'm still going to make sure that those who don't have any clothes to wear are wearing clothes. I'm going to make sure that the widows are taken care of in my church. I'm going to make sure that we're visiting the sick and visiting those who were in prison. We're going to continue to do that work. And at the same time, we're going to continue to speak truth to power. So when we see wrong, we're going to say something about it. And we're not going to keep our mouth shut. I like Proverbs chapter 31, where mother was advising King Lemuel. She told him to speak up and say something. We should never stop speaking up. And when we see something that's wrong, we need to say something about it. And we do not have to. The devil is a lie. I'm done.
Well, thank you very much for starting the introductions out of the audience. We have many distinguished people here. I thank you very much, Pastor E, for doing that. Also want to recognize Reverend Ted Maynard, who did not stand up. He is pastor of Bethel Wayne Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And we have the newly elected president of the Boston branch NAACP, the attorney Tanisha Sullivan. Congratulations. Thank you very much. And others, if we did not recognize you, you are all very special for being here this evening. I want to turn it over now to our commentators. I'm sure they have some very compelling questions that they want to ask. So Reverend Saunders and Minister Hobb, will turn it over to you for a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the audience.
Ladies first, okay. Well, first of all, panelists, you all have already been encouraging, very inspiring. I want to direct this question toward Reverend Bowman, and then those, the rest of the panel, if you desire to chime in, I would appreciate it. But she talked about the whole idea of a modern day abolitionist movement. And what comes to mind with that is a multicultural movement that is faith-based. And so the concern that I do have is that there is a real divide within the faith community along race lines that even manifested itself as it related to holding our leaders accountable for behavior unacceptable if we're dealing with biblical ideas. I want to add to that. We talk about even terms like conservatism, and I'm thinking about Reverend Barber, who said that I'm a conservative evangelical theological biblicist, which meant I am not going to allow a particular group to own conservatism, that we all own the values that come from Scripture. So talk to us about how to address that divide so that we can bring alive the 21st century abolitionist movement.
That's a really great and very dynamic question. I'll do my best to answer it. You know, I think you touched on a lot of things, and even before we go out to a multicultural conversation, I think that we need to even have a conversation amongst the Black church around how our theology. I am a proud womanist. I will say that, and a woman is really, that theology is really looking at how Black women is at the center of the the Black church and Black theology and our voice in the process and not being apologetic about it. I proudly stand in that tradition, and I'm very progressive. And so there's some things that even within my own denomination, we disagree on. And I'm okay operating and standing in that space. I'm not going to shrink because I know that God called me to be in that space, to broaden the conversation. Because if the things that we've done in the past worked, it got us to where we are now, but we have to reimagine ourselves if we're going to deal with 21st century issues. And we're living in a time where literally the future president of the United States can pretty much lie his way to office. And so I really think that we need to reconcile first within the Black community and the Black church to recognize there's differences amongst ourselves and figure out how we come together, knowing that our theologies are radically different, but there are still ways that we can work together. So I think it's good to start there. I had the privilege of going to a very diverse, well, actually, I made the school diverse. It was the first time, honestly, when I went to graduate school that I was in a situation where I was a minority. Up until that point, I was educated in the Black community. I went to HBCU, proud HBCU alum. And then when I got to graduate school, it really tested me. But as I sat in an environment where I was not, my voice and my narrative wasn't the center of that institution, I started to realize that there are people out there that may not understand my experience, but they're willing to work with me. And I think that figuring out ways to work with people and recognize that they have power in their own communities and figure out how do we share our stories in ways that will allow them to be a voice in their community and we become a voice in ours, to figure out how we collaborate, because literally that is the only way we're going to be able to move forward. We just don't live in an era anymore where we have that one Black leader. It just doesn't exist. And so we have to figure out ways, how do we work across differences and different communities to have impact. I think that's the cue to tell all the speakers to stop speaking. And I think that's what happens.
I just want to pick up where Reverend Bowman is and just touch a couple of things as tools for us to be able to use. One, you mentioned the important role of women in the church and in the movement. So as we're coming off of thinking about and reflecting on the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Joanne Robinson was a very important leader in Montgomery, the Montgomery bus boycott. Her memoir's title is The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Did. So I just want to say that title, and I want to commend the book because women played a huge role in making all of that happen. That's one. Two, on the abolitionists, someone mentioned another thing, that's Russell Moore, Reverend Russell Moore. Russell Moore is the senior theologian and political muscle commentator for the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you understand Southern Baptist, you know that's the evangelicals, or you're considered evangelicals. He made a comment that caught my ear, is that I'm so sick of where evangelicals are, I don't call myself evangelical. Right? So you want to build those kind of alliances, you can find somebody like that in that movement in that church. Another thing I want to recommend is their Frontline has a two-part series going on last night and tonight, Divided States of America. So just to get a sense of the history of how we got to this, it picks up on what the congressional staffers is saying, kind of a tool to be able to use. And there's a lot in it. I can't go through all of it. I would recommend it to you. One thing that's noteworthy is that it was August 2009 when all the members of Congress go back to their districts and get blasted. They get shook by their constituents around President Obama being president, around the Affordable Care Act, around the bailout of the banks. which created huge amounts of anger all across the country. So that's worth looking at. And I just want to note, we're at the William J. Seymour Community Farm. So just don't miss it. Like William J. Seymour, poor, one-eyed black man, like in Los Angeles, California, the Holy Spirit. You watch for what the Holy Spirit comes to. The Holy Spirit moves, and the world changes. The world changes. It's the most significant thing that happened in Christendom in the last century. Nothing's close, right? So just watch God. Watch God.
Right now.
I just wanted to add quickly 2 points to this because I've been in a conversation with a lot of, and I think we are talking around it, white folks, right? And I get invited by a lot of sort of mainline white denominations. And one of the things that so there is one segment of the predominantly white church of the evangelical movement, but there is also a mainline white church movement that has said very little. And part of what I said to the United Methodist Church, the UCC folks, all of those folks, it is kind of stand up and have some conversation with your cousins, right? So I think there's also a necessity for white folks to have conversations with other white folks about what is, I think, a real fear around the death of whiteness. And I think that Donald Trump tapped into the reality that people now feel that the demographic shifts that has been talked about, they feel like it's coming, right? And it is coming, right? So I think we can talk more deeply about the psychology of that, but I think we need white churches who said they are with us to be with us in a much more fundamental way and to have some conversations. People are going to be church universal, we have to be honest, right? I think there's a second piece that I think we just need time. I said I wasn't going to say it, but since we're going there today, right? I think that there were 3 parts of this demographic shift that are key. The first was around race and racial shifts. The second is around economics, and there's a lot of, lack of clarity about where we're going. But the millennial generation has very little trust for the current economic system. Most of us believe it's not necessarily can be shored up, and that's why you see the Occupy movement and a lot of other things. I do think we need to have a healthy conversation about capitalism, and I think it is not serving many people, and many of the people who it's not serving put their trust in hoping that Donald Trump would bring back a day that I don't believe is coming back. So the question is, if it's not coming back, what is the next economic structure that's going to be there, and can we make it work for more people than the last one? So that, I think, is another thing. But I think the last thing that we have to be honest about is the role of social norms around sexuality and the role that they play in this election and the conversation that's going on, right? And this is a problem that the Black church has a real hard time having a mature conversation about this. It is shifting. Where young people see the theology, and it is hurting us. For instance, people ask, why is the church not at the center of the Black Lives Matter movement? Because most of the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement are queer people who were pushed out of the churches as young people because they were gay, bisexual, lesbian. So I'm not saying you have to, shift where you are, but we at least need to be able to have a mature conversation, and we have not been able to. And those politics, like if people look at what happened with HB2 in Charlotte, we don't see how deeply these things are connected. So HB2 was the big law that Reverend Barber is pretty well known for putting together a coalition. HB2, which basically said it eliminated all protections for people who were being discriminated against. But it started because people were upset about the transgender bathroom bill. And I just want to name, I know folks have a hard time, but transgender people have been literally killed going in to the wrong bathroom. So while we may have different feelings, I'm not saying you have to be all the way there, but it seems to me we should stand up when people are being physically assaulted. And because of our, challenges, our inability to have the conversation
conversation more deeply. When the bill started off just around transgender folks, we didn't have anything to say. But then they tacked on a few things around race, and suddenly we had to say no. That's how it's going to get down. And so if we're not able to go there and to have the conversations, we will be divided in ways that are dangerous for this country and dangerous for us as Black folks. So I just want to, we're not going to have that conversation tonight, but we need to have a healthy, mature conversation around the changes.
Is that to suggest that if we're going to address injustices in the world outside of the faith community, we've got to be matured enough to address injustices inside of the faith community?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I got.
Yes. I want to quickly add on to this, because this may be a little controversial, but I think we do need to have a paradigm shift. I do. And here's why I say this. Because sometimes we forget, particularly as the African American community, the Black church, that how we got our religion. Like, this was not, Christianity was not our religion. We came from the continent of Africa. And we are so disconnected from that. And I'm not going to elevate up and romanticize, all African religions. Like, they don't have issues, some of those systems don't have issues. They do. But I'm saying that we are holding on tight to an ideology of theology that was given to us through oppression. And at some point, we have to elevate our thinking. We have to evolve our thinking. We have to give ourselves permission to see the divine and God in different ways in the way that it was given to us. We have defined it over the years and made it our own. And hence, we have a civil rights movement, and that created a Dr. Martin Luther King and a host of other people. But I don't think there's anything wrong with giving ourselves permission to just take a step back and reimagine how God can manifest herself or himself within us and move us into a different level of divinity.
I just want to pick up on those 2 points a little bit. So if you want to put a label on that, I don't like labels out conservative, right? Theological, right? Now, so I see this book come to reimagine. This is an Afro-Asiatic book. Right? This is not a European document. And so part of what I think we have to do, particularly in this age, is you gotta just get into the word and submit to it. Right? Whatever it says, you do. Right? So when Jesus goes up on the mountain and begins to preach, he's outside of creation. He is with the people. There's a crowd, but it's disciples that are responding. We need to make a decision. Do I want to be with the crowd, or do I want to be a disciple? In preaching, listen, I'm not going to try to do that, but it's a long sermon. Dig into it. And at the end, he says, look, if you take these words, and you do what I say, and you're building your so we just got to I'm not trying to give an answer to anything. I'm just saying, get into the word and the other, and I picked this up again. It really starts in Africa. So think about it. A lot of things from Denmark are coming to people. Part of the reason we need history and then begin to build out of that.
this country has always tried to use God to bless what it's already done. I don't believe that many of our founding fathers who were writing slavery into our Constitution got that from God. So what I would push back on is, I think whenever we put God and the state together, I have seen usually bad things happen.
What to the slave is the 4th of July? Mr. President?
And I'd like to use as a subject from which to speak this afternoon the other America. And I use this subject because there are literally two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation. And in a sense, this America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their minds, and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, millions of people experience every day the opportunity of having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. And this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. Economically, the Negro is worse off today than he was 15 and 20 years ago. And so the unemployment rate among whites at one time was about the same as the unemployment rate among Negroes. I say, as I've always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and justice. So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met, and it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And I submit this afternoon that we can end poverty in the United States. Our nation has the resources to do it. The national gross product of America will rise to the astounding figure of some $780 billion this year. We have the resources. The question is whether our nation has the will. So what we are seeking to do in the civil rights movement is to deal with this problem of the two Americas. We are seeking to make America one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pray for peace, the peace of every golden day and hour. Pray for peace, 'cause in our thoughtful praying there is power to love and let our hearts be free, power to watch things grow as they should be. Bless this world that we'll find harmony. Pray for peace. Pray for peace. And know that every fearful thought has passed. Pray for peace. And in our thoughtful praying, it will last. Friends will learn the joy to give and share. For each heart really wants to care. I'm so glad that He's always there. Pray for peace. Pray for peace. The peace of every golden day and hour. Pray for peace, 'cause in our thoughtful praying there is power to love and let our hearts be free, power to watch things grow as they should be. Bless this world that we'll find harmony. Pray for peace. Pray for peace. And know that every fearful thought Pray, pray for peace. And in our thoughtful praying, it will last. Pray for things that we hold most dear. Pray to keep our vision strong and clear. I'm so glad that He's always there. Pray, pray for peace. Pray for peace. Peace.
What to the slave is the 4th of July? Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, he who could address this audience without a quailing sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more strikingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability, than I do this day. A feeling has crept over me, quite unfavorable to the exercise of my limited powers of speech. The task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I know that apologies of this sort are generally considered flat and unmeaning. I trust, however, that mine will not be so considered. Should I seem at ease, my appearance would much misrepresent me. The little experience I have had in addressing public meetings in country schoolhouses avails me nothing on the present occasion. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way for me. It is true that I have often had the privilege to speak in this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. But neither their familiar faces nor the perfect gauge I think I have of Corinthian Hall seems to free me from embarrassment. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. You will not, therefore, be surprised if in what I have to say I evince no elaborate preparation, nor grace my speech with any high-sounding exordium. With little experience and with less learning, I have been able to throw my thoughts hastily and imperfectly together, and trusting to your patient and generous indulgence, I will proceed to lay them before you. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance, and to the signs and to the wonders associated with that act and that day. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life, and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. 76 years, though a good old age for a man, is but a mere speck in the life of a nation. 70 years and 10 is the allotted time for individual men, but nations number their years by thousands. According to this fact, you are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed, under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. The eye of the reformer is met with angry flashes, portending disastrous times, but his heart may well beat lighter at the thought that America is young, and that she is still in the impressible stage of her existence. May he not hope that high lessons of wisdom, of justice and of truth, will yet give direction to her destiny? Were the nation older, the patriot's heart might be sadder, and the reformer's brow heavier. Its future might be shrouded in gloom, and the hope of its profits go out in sorrow. There is consolation in the thought that America is young. Great streams are not easily turned from channels worn deep in the course of ages. They may sometimes rise in quiet and stately majesty, and inundate the land, refreshing and fertilizing the earth with their mysterious properties. They may also rise in wrath and fury, and bear away, on their angry waves, the accumulated wealth of years of toil and hardship. They, however, gradually flow back to the same old channel, and flow on as serenely as ever. But, while the river may not be turned aside, it may dry up, and leave nothing behind but the withered branch and the unsightly rock, to howl in the abyss-sweeping wind, the sad tale of departed glory. As with rivers, so with nations. Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, and England as the fatherland. This home government, you know, although a considerable distance from your home, did, in the existence of its parental prerogatives, impose upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper. But your fathers, who had not adopted the fashionable idea of this day, of the infallibility of government, and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far in their excitement as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Such a declaration of agreement on my part would not be worth much to anybody. It would, certainly, prove nothing as to what part I might have taken had I lived during the great controversy of 1776. To say now that America was right and England wrong is exceedingly easy. Everybody can say it. The dastard, not less than the noble brave, can flippantly descant on the tyranny of England towards the American colonies. It is fashionable to do so, but there was a time when, to pronounce against England, and in favor of the cause of the colonies, tried men's souls. They who did so were accounted in their day plotters of mischief, agitators, and rebels, dangerous men. To side with the right against the wrong, with the weak against the strong, and with the oppressed against the oppressor, here lies the merit, and the one which, of all others, seems unfashionable in our day. The cause of liberty may be stabbed by the men who glory in the deeds of your fathers. But to proceed. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. Their conduct was wholly unexceptionable. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn. Yet they persevered. They were not the men to look back. As the sheet anchor took a firmer hold, when the ship is tossed by the storm, so did the cause of your fathers grow stronger, as it breasted the chilling blasts of kingly displeasure. The greatest and best of British statesmen admitted its justice, and the loftiest eloquence of the British Senate came to its support. But, with that blindness which seems to be the unvarying characteristic of tyrants, since Pharaoh and his hosts were drowned in the Red Sea, the British government persisted in the exactions complained of. The madness of this course, we believe, is admitted now even by England, but we fear the lesson is wholly lost on our present rulers. Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent, as has been intimated, of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Such people lived then, had lived before, and will, probably, ever have a place on this planet, and their course, in respect to any great change, no matter how great the good to be attained, or the wrong to be redressed by it, may be calculated with as much precision as can be the course of the stars. They hate all changes, but silver, gold, and copper change. Of this sort of change, they are always strongly in favor. These people were called Tories in the days of your fathers, and the appellation, probably, conveyed the same idea that is meant by a more modern, though a somewhat less euphemonious term, which we often find in our papers, applied to some of our old politicians. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful, but, amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it. On the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution, and as we seldom hit upon resolutions, drawn up in our day, whose transparency is at all equal to this, it may refresh your minds and help my story if I read it. Quote, resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, dissolved. End quote. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring-bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring-bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny, so, indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles, be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. From the round top of your ship of state, dark and threatening clouds may be seen. Heavy billows, like mountains in the distance, disclose to the leeward huge forms of flinty rocks. That bolt drawn, that chain broken, and all is lost. Cling to this day, cling to it, and to its principles, with the grasp of a storm-tossed mariner to a spar at midnight. The coming into being of a nation, in any circumstances, is an interesting event. But besides general considerations, there were peculiar circumstances which make the advent of this republic an event of special attractiveness. The whole scene, as I look back to it, was simple, dignified, and sublime. The population of the country, at the time, stood at the insignificant number of 3 millions. The country was poor in the munitions of war. The population was weak and scattered, and the country a wilderness unsubdued. There were then no means of concert and combination, such as exist now. Neither steam nor lightning had then been reduced to order and discipline. From the Potomac to the Delaware was a journey of many days. Under these and innumerable other disadvantages, your fathers declared for liberty and independence, and triumphed. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, too, great enough to give fame to a great age. It does not often happen to a nation to raise, at one time, such a number of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not, certainly, the most favorable, and yet I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did, and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interests, and, though this is not the highest form of human excellence, all will concede that it is a rare virtue, and that when it is exhibited, it ought to command respect. He who will, intelligently, lay down his life for his country, is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests. They were peaceful men, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but that they knew their limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment, and stretched away in strength into the distant future. They seized upon eternal principles, and set a glorious example in their defense. Mark them. Fully appreciating the hardships to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, honorably inviting the scrutiny of an onlooking world, reverently appealing to heaven to attest their sincerity, soundly comprehending the solemn responsibility they were about to assume, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them, your fathers, the fathers of this republic, did, most deliberately, under the inspiration of a glorious patriotism, and with a sublime faith in the great principles of justice and freedom, lay deep the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm.
And I'd like to use as a subject from which to speak this afternoon the other America. And I use this subject because there are literally two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation. And in a sense, this America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their mind, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. And this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. Economically, the Negro is worse off today than he was 15 and 20 years ago. And so the unemployment rate among whites at one time was about the same as the unemployment rate among Negroes. But today the unemployment rate among Negroes is twice that of whites. And the average income of the Negro is today 50% less than whites. And as we look at these problems, we see them growing and developing every day.
A new study has found that the wealth gap between white households and minorities has widened in recent years. The wealth of white households was 13 times greater than that of black households in 2013, versus 8 times the wealth in 2010. And the wealth of white households was more than 10 times that of Hispanic households, up from 9 times the wealth in 2010. Pew researchers analyzing data from the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances found that the gap between whites and blacks has reached its highest point since 1989. Researchers say a number of factors may be responsible for the widening gap: falling income, lower savings rates, and different asset holdings.
In this America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions, and they find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. Little children in this other America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental skies. And as we look at this other America, we see it as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams.